could not guarantee there won't be any hardship. It came as the number of those who have died from coronavirus rose to 177 in the UK. To help the NHS, more than 65,000 retired doctors and nurses are being asked to return to duty. And a list of key workers who can keep their children in school was published, as many other pupils were sent home for the foreseeable future. More on all of those developments in a moment. First, our political correspondent Paul Brand reports on that nationwide shutdown and the help for workers and businesses.
The start of the weekend in London, but tonight the government's calling last orders. Within hours, pubs, restaurants, cafes will all be closed. Voluntary measures, now a written instruction to stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives.
We are collectively telling cafes, pubs, bars and restaurants to close tonight as soon as they reasonably can and not to open tomorrow. We're also telling nightclubs, theatres, cinemas, gyms and leisure centres to close on the same timescale.
Meaning businesses won't have long to drown their sorrows.
It doesn't really come as a surprise that these measures have been taken, but at the same time it's equally devastating.
This evening, the Chancellor tried to reduce the impact on workers. If businesses can't pay them, the government will instead.
The economic intervention that I'm announcing today is unprecedented in the history of the British state. The government is going to step in and help to pay people's wages. Government grants will cover 80% of the salary of retained workers, up to a total of £2,500 a month.
He also announced a £1,000 rise per year in both universal credit and tax credits. Businesses can defer VAT payments until the end of June and get access to interest-free loans for 12 months. A mix of measures which should help restaurants like this one. There are some places in Britain where you can still find pasta, but soon nobody will be able to come in and buy it, and they can't pay their staff for long.
It's terrifying when people start coming through the door and the money stops going in the bank. Restaurants like this have big overheads, huge rents, big staff costs. We pay really well, we really look after our people. It's days, not weeks.
In fact, businesses have just hours, as tonight, closures across the country aim to shut down this virus. Paul Brand, ITV News.
Well, all those businesses affected across the country tonight are assessing the impact of this major decision from the government. Damon Green, our correspondent, is at a music venue in Liverpool tonight. Damon, what's the response and reaction there?
Well, this is Jimmy's at the top of Bold Street. Normally on a Friday evening at this time, this place would be packed, would be heaving, but like every other bar, every other club, every other cafe on this street, it's now closed. This place was in the position as many others were. The customers were told to stay away, but they were told to stay open, and now things are different. Now, George Craig was the co-founder of this place. What's your response to being told to close?
Wow, we want to congratulate the government for everything that they're doing. They're supporting our staff, businesses like ours. The Chancellor absolutely smashed that speech, one for the history books, and it's important that we stay inside now, stay safe, and it's a shame that we had to close just now, but tonight we can enjoy live music from the Jimmy's Instagram channel instead of downstairs in the basement. So.
Well, thank you very much for that reaction. The positive reaction from Jimmy's here, many other clubs, so many other venues across the country will be mulling on the implications for them.
Damon, thank you. Well, our political editor Robert Peston joins me now. Robert, and a very dramatic change of strategy from the government tonight.
Your turn.
Will it work? Could they go even further?
Go on, Robert.
Come on. I mean, I think this is more a ramping up of the strategy that they changed about a week ago, and I want to put this into context. We have never, I think, in peacetime seen such dramatic intervention into the functioning of this country, the functioning of the economy, closing down vast numbers of businesses and then saying they are going to support those who are employed by those businesses to the tune of many tens of billions of pounds per month. We are looking at an increase in the government's debt to fund all of this, potentially by the time we're finished, of hundreds of billions of pounds. This is a massive effort by the government to make sure that the cost to our livelihoods of this horrible illness is, you know, not as great as it would be if governments did what they normally do in a recession, which is to give much more modest help. Now, the question of whether it will work absolutely hinges on what we now see in hospitals. Capacity in London hospitals, many doctors are telling me, is getting near to full. And what the government is looking at is whether these measures alone will slow down the spread of the virus enough to allow the NHS to cope. If the NHS is seen not to be coping, then there will be more dramatic interventions, including, for example, the closure of non-essential shops.
Robert Peston, thank you. Our business editor Joel Hills joins me now. I mean, we've heard there from Robert, billions of pounds is going to cost. Your assessment tonight about how businesses will react and how quickly they can get their hands on it.
I think there'll be a hope that this could be quite effective. I've just been speaking to the boss of
Joel Hills, business editor.
Closing 300 of his pubs. But he described this as a lifeline that's exceeded my expectation. The big lifeboat here is the retention scheme that Robert was mentioning. The state's going to pay 80%, not of everyone's wages, but the wages of staff who find themselves at home unable to work. But it will only do so if they're kept on the payroll, maximum £2,500 a month for 3 months. But this is a massive incentive for the owners of nightclubs, gyms, factories to hold on to staff even as they shut down. This is great for the employed if you're on low income. It also applies to 0 hours. It's not so great if you're one of the 5 million self-employed. There, the Chancellor seems to be accepting people will end up out of work. It's improving the safety work, out of work benefits, universal credit, working tax credit, housing benefit has been improved. We have no idea here regarding cost about take-up. This will cost billions. The national debt will soar, but this is a national emergency.
Joel, thank you. Before tonight's measures were announced, people were already told to keep their distance and avoid socialising. Not everyone has followed that advice. So what does that tell us about whether this shutdown will work? Here's Neil Connery.
In the heart of the capital, the borough of Southwark has one of the highest number of recorded cases of COVID-19 in the country. Many here are heeding the government's health warnings, but on some streets that advice hasn't been achieving the desired effect. In this market cafe, the frustrations of staying in for this group were clear.
I think it's the first time we've actually been out of the house in 2 weeks. Nurseries have been closed, so the kids have been at home for quite an extended period of time. They're currently out with their nursery friends, so at this stage, I guess if somebody has caught it, they've probably all got it anyway.
Despite the threat from the virus, some restaurants were still doing business today. The nearby Barber's was also open.
It's a calculated risk, I guess, from that point of view, for something that people might say, well, it's just a haircut, did you need to get it done? But at the same time, you know, it's part of community spirit. See, I mean, you know, I've known these guys for a long time, and if they're going to be struggling, you want to make sure they've got as much money in their pocket before that happens as possible.
What's clear is that despite the government's efforts, not everyone in London is getting the message. And yet the capital has the highest number of confirmed cases of the virus in the UK. Tonight's announcement to shut pubs, restaurants and nightclubs met with this reaction.
Inconvenient, but it's a once-in-a-generation event, so we'll be telling our children about this in the future. So if it's got to be done, it's got to be done.
Calling time to help in the battle against coronavirus. Neil Connery, ITV News.
And with many now facing their first weekend under strict social distancing rules, there's a guide as to what you can and can't do on our website. That's itv.com/news. Retired doctors and nurses are being asked to return to work to help deal with this emergency. And there's been a warning sign of the kind of pressure the NHS is already under. A major hospital in North London declared a critical incident after a surge in patients with the virus. Juliet Bremner explains.
After weeks of warnings, this North London hospital became the first to experience a COVID-19 emergency. Northwick Park yesterday declared a critical incident as it ran out of beds in intensive care. In a letter seen by ITV News, the chief nurse said, "We have this evening declared a critical incident in relation to our critical care capacity at Northwick Park Hospital. This is due to an increasing number of patients with COVID-19. This means we currently do not have enough space for patients requiring critical care." The NHS Trust, which runs Northwick Park, tonight said the incident had been stood down. The Prime Minister sounded exasperated when asked if the crisis had been underestimated.
It's perfectly obvious when you look at the gradient of the disease that we have a real threat now to our country, to the ability of our NHS to manage it, and unless we get this right, you know, we are going to see thousands of lives lost, as I say, needlessly.
A nurse who works at Northwick Park put this image on Facebook showing her and colleagues wearing clinical waste bags on their heads because their protective equipment, or PPE, still hasn't arrived. She asked to remain anonymous.
When we stay there, like in a bay for 4 patients, looking after them, taking all their medications, giving it to them, sometimes we almost stay there for 1 hour and 30 minutes. I know it's not really safe for us, but then we have to do something because of the shortage of PPE.
Retired nurse Mary-Louise Holdsworth accepts this is an emergency without parallel. She's answering the government's plea to go back to work.
We've experienced epidemics before, like the swine flu and other things, but nothing on this scale, nothing that has the potential to increase the way this is likely to do. And we know that the NHS as it is at the moment is not going to be able to cope with the demand.
Italy's been warning that their nightmare will be replicated if Britain fails to act quickly enough. Hospitals in the capital are now starting to experience just how devastating that could be. Juliet Bremner, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News. Confusion still for some parents, children and teachers as schools close for what could be their last day of the year. And how neighbours are rallying round to help those isolated by the virus. Those stories and more after the break.